Oh no, the Green Party has now confirmed that they want to scrap the tax exemption for Bitcoin and introduce a massive Bitcoin tax, which could be as high as the income tax, so in the worst case, almost 50%. This can be gathered from a letter from the Green Party that was just shared on X by Joana Cotar, highly explosive. What information is contained here is, it is clear here that there is no openness here. For alternative payment options like Bitcoin, for innovations like Bitcoin, it's clear that they don't recognize the power and potential of Bitcoin. Like, for example, other parties like the AfD, or for that matter, even the FDP, who are now opening up to Bitcoin. Like, for example, with other parties like the AfD, or for that matter, even the FDP, who are now opening up to Bitcoin. The Greens want to massively regulate Bitcoin. And that's a really, really big problem. Because right now, we still live in something like a tax paradise in Germany after 1 year on a personal level. Are the Bitcoins you hold here, for example, in a private wallet or something, tax-free? And that's supposed to be overturned now, because it can't be that, for example, stocks have to be taxed. But Bitcoin is not taxed. And then the socialist logic just comes out. Then we just say, yeah, okay, if stocks are taxed, then we have to tax Bitcoin too. Because otherwise, the whole year here is unfair. Now we're going to take a close look at this letter and this writing, because this was already thrown into the room a while back, that the Greens actually want to overturn the tax exemption here. And now it's being confirmed again, because there were inquiries made here. What's the situation? What's the current status? Do you still want to tax Bitcoin here, or are you still on the side of not taxing it? So are they basically saying that Bitcoin won't be taxed here? I also did the interview with the AfD politician, Peter Boring, who clearly stated, no, the AfD does not want to further tax Bitcoin here. I think it'll be similar with the FDP, although I'm not exactly sure whether they have a paragraph about that. But for sure, the Greens want to tax Bitcoin more. And it's a big argument that you keep hearing from people, that they, for example, say, okay, you can still get used to Germany here. We'll also take a look at some comments later. Because many people have already announced, hey, if the tax deadline changes, that would be a huge reason for me to move abroad. I have to say, nothing has happened yet. The Greens are also, I'd say, not here. Right now in power, they could just overturn the law here tomorrow, for example, or something like that. That's a long road until the law is passed and so on. You need majorities for that. They can't just push that through on their own. But in any case, we see the political position here, and that's really very strongly criticized. Because that means another setback for Germany. Not only do you have the 50,000, not only are they selling Bitcoin, but they're also making it very unattractive for private individuals here. Very, I'd say, unattractive. And on the same side, there's inflation. We're basically having trouble saving for retirement. The pension system is broken. We have inflation. And now the question is, how can we even prepare for this? I say stocks are taxed. Okay, you could say this has been happening for a long time. Then people just say, okay, if it's always been done this way, then it's justified. But now there are options like Bitcoin where you still have certain loopholes, where you still have a certain tax exemption, and that's supposed to be taken away too. And then it just makes it even harder for savers to save for retirement, for their retirement and so on. And we need to take a look at that now. Let's take a look at this document because it's highly explosive. The whole document and the source come from Joana Cotar. I'll link that for you down below. She writes here, instead of with stocks and the like, are you saving with Bitcoin? That's the question she's asking here. Or do you have gold? Are you saving for retirement? So what are you doing about retirement savings, she asks here. Because there are now different options. And now she says here, the Greens are really throwing a wrench in your plans. The tax exemption is supposed to go away, and they're even considering setting it as high as the income tax. Current response to an email from a Bitcoiner. So a Bitcoiner wrote an email to the Greens. And Joana Cotar made it very clear that saving is going to be rewarded even less now. Also, people who are trying to save some private money on the side, wanting to save on the side, is going to be made even harder now, because that's exactly what's so twisted. That means our systems just aren't working. We have chronic inflation and we have a pension system. It's really heading straight for a wall here, where we're facing some really, really big challenges and problems. The demographics are really, really bad. We have way too few contributors compared to the people who are going to take it out, because we simply have a pay-as-you-go system here. With a good demographic situation, that's okay, but not with a bad one. The next 5 to 10 years will be tough. Without alternatives like Bitcoin, we'll face challenges. Elderly poverty is rising, and without Bitcoin, it will worsen. We need to act now as obstacles are already present, and elderly poverty is increasing. And if you want to do something about it, they're basically throwing a wrench in the works now. And now check out this highly explosive email. In our 2021 election program, we established that we want to abolish the tax exemption for capital gains in the area of commodities, precious metals, and crypto assets. So it's not just about Bitcoin, it also affects commodities and gold. That we want to abolish the tax exemption for capital gains in the area of commodities, precious metals, and crypto assets. So it's not just about Bitcoin, it also affects commodities and gold. This also means every gold bug. Everyone should really pay attention and think carefully about which party they're going to vote for. Because from the way it sounds here, that means all cryptocurrencies are completely affected. Even all the crypto brothers, the Ripple guys who are coming out again and all that. Even those folks should really think about whether they can actually support the Greens. I mean, everyone has to decide for themselves. I'm not throwing any hate at the Greens. I mean, everyone has to decide for themselves. I'm not throwing any hate at the Greens here. Could be that you're making your choice here. The decision isn't just dependent on the crypto taxation or the Bitcoin taxation. It definitely means that it's still up for discussion whether this taxation will be regulated like capital gains tax or like income tax. It's still open and should be determined in the regular democratic discourse. So what's up for debate right now is not whether we do it or not, but if I understand this correctly, the only thing on the table is whether we do it on the. It's not about whether we do it or not, but if I understand this correctly, the only thing up for debate here is whether we do it based on income tax. So are we going to adjust it to income tax or keep it under capital gains tax? Let's do the whole thing on the income tax. So are we going to adjust it to income tax or keep it under capital gains tax? The capital gains tax is significantly lower than the income tax under certain conditions. That would mean if someone, let's say, hits the maximum income level, here comes so at the highest tax rate, then you could basically do this here. Taxation on Bitcoin winnings mean up to 50%. Just think about that 50% Bitcoin taxation. That means if you have like 100,000 euros in capital gains from that 100,000 euros, capital gains, 100,000. So you're losing 50,000 euros in capital gains just like that. Euros taken away. And the craziest part is that's money that has already been taxed. That means you're basically facing double taxation. So let's say you go to work, just for example, let's just do the worst case scenario. So we really have a top earner here with a tax rate of almost 50%. I think 45% is the maximum tax rate here, but we can just round it up to about 50% for simplicity's sake. For simplicity's sake, he pays 50% taxes, no idea. So he gives up half of his salary. And now he buys with the little that's left here. He buys Bitcoin and then has to give up basically half of it again. Of course, it's an exaggerated example. There are also people who pay, for example, no taxes at all if you're really, really low on the income scale. If you have a very, very low income, or there are people who fall somewhere in between. So this is an extreme example that I've brought up here. It could also be that you only pay 20% later or just 30% or the capital gains tax. When that happens, but here's the question, as I hinted at before, whether it's even justified. Here to raise the taxes so massively, wouldn't it actually be much better? We're adjusting it the other way around. So here come the socialists and say it's unfair. With stocks, we have taxation, not with Bitcoin. So we need to adjust that. But we could also do it the other way around. We could also say, hey, come on, there's no taxation on Bitcoin. We're adjusting the stocks here. The stock taxation, also Bitcoin, and we get rid of the stock taxation. We're getting rid of the property tax here. With real estate, there's also a holding period of 10 years. It used to be 1 year, I think, or was it 3 years or something like that? At least it used to be different. Now, it's 10 years. And that keeps changing more and more. And that's also the big danger, that many people see that the door is slowly closing more and more. More and more taxation is coming our way. They're trying to pull money out of our pockets, basically, in the form of inflation, taxation, lower pensions, worse quality of life. Basically, the whole game is getting harder to play here. And what if you can't even use the solutions like Bitcoin and so on? Or maybe you can use it, but then it's like, hold on, okay, you can use it, but then you just have to pay taxes. I mean, the Greens aren't going that far yet, that they say, here are unrealized gains. There have already been some proposals in certain countries. That would definitely be the absolute nightmare. At least you can say, thankfully, they're not going that far. But I really think that this isn't a good tactic here. A lot of people who might still be in the Green camp will really start to think about possibly looking for other parties instead. Will really start to think about it, possibly looking for other parties instead. At least if anyone here has anything to do with Bitcoin. And the funny thing is, I was just talking about that scenario a few days ago with some folks here at a meeting, that I also said that we came to the conclusion. At some point, this tax exemption here is going to change. In Austria, the tax exemption has already changed, and eventually it might happen in Germany too. then a lot of people said that would be the line for them where they would really say, okay, now I'm getting out of Germany too, because I don't want to pay taxes on my Bitcoin here, because I just don't see it that way here. Now, for example, someone writes down in the comments, here my plan is to buy Bitcoin and just hold it. He just writes that and says, then wait until the regulation gets overturned by a freedom-loving government. Laws aren't set in stone. The scarcity of Bitcoin already. So time is working in my favor. So his theory or plan is, for example, to just not sell the Bitcoin. Because you have to say that too. You only pay taxes here if you actually sell the Bitcoin. If you just shake up the Bitcoin, then you don't pay any taxes. And his tactic is basically to just hold out for as long as possible. If, for example, a tax comes on Bitcoin, just to hold out for as long as possible. Until Bitcoin is tax-free again. That means you might wait 4 years, maybe 8 years, maybe 10 years. And eventually, the Bitcoin will be tax-free again. For example, if a libertarian party comes to power, you also have to assume that it hasn't really happened de facto yet. But that's currently just the plan. But that's really important for a lot of people to assess here, which party you choose here. And he says, well, that wouldn't be so bad for him right now, because you can just hang in there. You can just hang in there. You probably don't want to sell the Bitcoin anyway. And then he says here, if the scenario doesn't happen within the desired time frame, then just move abroad. So he just says to hang in there. And what if it really comes to that? That you have to sell the Bitcoin here and just can't hold out anymore. If you can't wait 20 or 30 years, then he would also move abroad. I think that's actually a viewpoint that a lot of people have. I'd really be interested in that too. Feel free to drop that in the comments below. Would that be a red line for you where you might actually consider moving out of Germany? What if you have to pay taxes on all your Bitcoin profits, or let's say significant Bitcoin profits here? It's worth mentioning that it's probably not going to be applied retroactively. I think in Austria, it's going to be applied retroactively for a year. I'm not sure if that's going to be applied retroactively here. I mean, they probably can't do that retroactively for 5 years or anything. So then maybe at most a year. But even a year retroactively would be really, really crazy. And that means the Bitcoin that you're already holding now, that are also tax-free, they're usually in a safe space. And that's why the question often comes up, whether it's really worth it, trading back and forth so much. Because if you have Bitcoin here that's really declared tax-free, and you're trading back and forth, then it can suddenly happen that you, let's say, fall out of that tax-free status. And if you're trading back and forth, then it can suddenly happen that you, let's say, fall out of the tax-free status. And if, for example, at the end of the year, a law like that comes along, then you have the Bitcoin that were actually tax-free before. But if you've been trading back and forth, then the Bitcoin are no longer tax-free. So you're basically in a tough spot here, in a really tough spot. And that's where a portfolio tracking tool and a tax tool like coin tracking really come in handy. I'll also put a link to coin tracking down below where you can easily track your portfolio, where you can easily check which Bitcoins are tax-free, which ones are not tax-free, which ones are within the holding period, and which ones are not in the holding period. It's an absolute help here. And that's really, really important that you take all of this into account. For example, there are solutions if something like this should come up. That's something people do in other countries too, where there is Bitcoin taxation, for example, that you just keep track of the Bitcoin here. Bitcoin taxed when sold. No profit or loss, no tax. When you sell them, if you don't make any profits or if you incur losses, you don't have to pay any taxes here. And if you say, okay, I have, for example, 1 million in unrealized gains and I want to buy something, then I could obviously say, okay, I'm going to sell all the Bitcoins. And now let's assume the worst case scenario again. I have 1 million in unrealized gains. If I get taxed at a maximum rate of 50%, then I have the problem of having to pay 500,000 euros in taxes. But if I take that million in unrealized gains and use it as collateral, meaning I leverage the Bitcoin, I get the advantage that I'm not actually selling the Bitcoin. I'm just using the Bitcoin as collateral, so they're still mine. And on top of that, I have fiat money leveraged, paying taxes in euros. But if I take that million in unrealized gains and use it as collateral, meaning I put up the Bitcoin, and get a fiat loan, then I have the advantage that I'm not actually selling the Bitcoin. I'm just using the Bitcoin as collateral, so they're still mine. And on top of that, I have fiat money leveraged. I can now buy this with the fiat money, what I wanted to buy, like a house or something. And then the tax is eliminated. And that's actually a really smart strategy. Rich and wealthy people have been using this for years, like leveraging stocks, that they leverage real estate, that they leverage all sorts of things to basically avoid the taxes. That means very, very few big investors, when it really comes down to paying big chunks of taxes. Very, very few people actually cash out their gains here because they clearly know, hey, it's way smarter for me to just hold on, to leverage the whole thing. But you also have to say this. Right now, there isn't really an offer for that with Bitcoin. Those are, let's say, things that are still very, very inexperienced, like untested. You first have to take a look at that. Now, the credit market is evolving here. I mean, this is a big deal that's happening here. Howard Lutnick is working on it with Kendra Fitzgerald. There are also other people working on it. This is a big deal that's coming our way. But as it stands, there isn't a big offer available yet. So that means if it happens now, this year it's happening, but it probably won't happen this year. But if it were to happen next year, then the whole Bitcoin lending story probably wouldn't be that far along yet. That you could really say here, hey, you can safely leverage your Bitcoin. Plus, there are also people who don't want to do that. When you're just, let's say, leveraged, there are people who don't want to be dependent on the bank, and so on. There are a ton of very, very understandable reasons for that. And in the end, it leads back to that. It's just the people who are really financially educated here that benefit from this system, while those who don't engage with finances can't really do any lending strategies here. They just end up paying. They can't do any lending strategies here. They just pay here, the taxes. They're basically being whipped here. And on the other hand, financial education and stuff like that isn't really taught. That's why it's so important to follow the channel and subscribe. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so we can gain some traction here. And that's the sneaky part of it all. So there's an even bigger divide between the rich and the poor. Because the poor, they don't really get it sometimes. They don't have the financial education. You can't blame the people for that because they weren't taught it in school or anything like that. That's why you have to somehow teach yourself privately. And on the other side, the rich people who have been doing this for years, they know exactly how to leverage here, how to use external capital, how to leverage here. It's smart to make sure you're not getting liquidated, that you don't have too much leverage, not too little leverage and stuff like that. And in the end, it's a really sneaky situation that's coming our way, where in my opinion, the current Bitcoin holders aren't benefiting, where maybe socialists benefit, who can then redistribute money here. Politicians, they're going to redistribute money. That means they have more income. But the question is, what happens to the income? I find it very problematic. But if you still want to buy Bitcoin, then I'll put a link down below for you. 21 Bitcoin, where you can easily buy Bitcoin securely. With the code Bitcoin Hotel, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin here. Absolutely recommend it, because this is really a super hot topic that's going on right now. Let me know what you think about it. See you later. Peace out.